feels so official. Hi everyone. This is my first sit-down book video since moving to this house in summer, which is insane to say, and also my first time filming in front of the new and improved book wall that goes all the way up to the ceiling. But I'm sitting here today because I'm filming my favorite books of 2024 video. I've done this video for 4 years now, which again, crazy to say. Obviously, I couldn't go a year without it. So we're here. The year is not over, and I know that, so there is chance for me to find another favorite book, and if that's the case, I'll just have to mention it next year. But I have 1, 2, 3, 9, 10. Oh, I actually have 10 books. That's perfect. My top 10 of the year. I didn't even do that intentionally. I genuinely went and picked my favorites out of everything I've read this year. So these are my 5-star books of the year. Actually, I don't think all of them are 5 stars. I think probably half of them are 5 stars and the other half are probably like 4.5 to 4.75 because you guys know I'm stingy with my 5 stars. But I thought I would just break them down, explain synopsis of all of them without spoilers, but pitch them to you. So if you're looking for your new favorite book, you might find it here. I have quite a few fantasies and then a few contemporary romances. Those are the like only genres I read this year. Was mostly romantasy, honestly. I guess let's just get into it. So the first book I'm going to talk about, you could probably see this coming from a mile away, and I'm sure it's in everybody's list of favorite books this year, and it's Funny Story by Emily Henry. Emily Henry's never written a book that I dislike. I would read anything she's written, and I've said that for years, but this one specifically, something about it hit everything I love in a book. If you've read her books before, I would say they're romances with just like so much more in them, and the reason I always like them is because they're so deep, and they deeply dive into the characters, especially the one of the point of view you're in. So in this book, we were in the point of view of Daphne. When I was reading this book, I genuinely felt like everything that Daphne was thinking, saying, and feeling were exactly things that I've experienced and felt myself that I've never like known were a universal experience, or not even universal, but something that other people experience as well. There were direct quotes in this book that I've said out loud before. When she said it, I was like, Emily Henry's literally living in my brain, and I think she has this talent of being able to make characters so real and relatable, and that's why her books are so well loved. I think this is probably up there with one of my favorite books by her, if not my favorite. I loved it so much, and I gave it 5 stars. On a basic level, this book follows Daphne, who just got cheated on. Now she has no place to live because she was living with her, I think, fiance. She ends up becoming roommates with the man who was dating the woman that her fiance cheated on her with. So both of these two, Daphne and Miles, got cheated on, and that's kind of how they met, and they end up living together because they both don't have someone to live with now. And so it's roommate trope first, and I would say they become friends first, and they're really good friends before anything romantic starts happening. But it's such a deep exploration of her character, specifically his too, but mostly her feelings, why she is the way that she is, how she can fix it, how she needs to be shown love in order to believe it because of the things she's been through and experienced, and being in a toxic relationship and being cheated on. These two characters are so opposite in so many ways. Like, she's described as being like super uptight, and he's super fun and adventurous, and they end up spending this summer together where he's trying to get her to like have more fun and like live her life and not stew in her sadness of her breakup, and realize she's so much better off. And obviously they fall in love while doing all of that, but even their love story was just so deep and just so much. I don't want to compare it to other romances, but I feel like this is in a category of its own. Like, I would not pin this up against a normal contemporary romance. Like, this is its own genre of something so superior because it still has a full romance with a build-up and all the angst that you could want, but it also is just such a deep character analysis, and she does this in all of her books, but I just loved this one so much because I found it so relatable. I think one of my favorite things about this book is her writing. She is such a talented writer. I was just talking about this with someone, about how her books are in a league of their own because of her writing. Even the way that this book starts, it starts with her ex-fiance telling a story of how the two of them met while they were still together, and then it ends with a similar concept. Like, it all ties back together of the storytelling, and that's why it's called Funny Story, and it's just so good. Like, she's such a genius and so talented, and just like one of those people that you know puts genuine thought and care and so much work into all of her books to be able to write them the way that she does. I just loved it so much. I could talk about this book forever. I can't wait for her next book. I'll read everything she writes as soon as it comes out, and it will always end up in my favorites list every year without fail. I'm not doing this in any order, by the way. I mean, that one was one of my favorites, but this is not in any order. But I read Powerless by Lauren Roberts this year. This is one of the first fantasies I've ever read, and I think that's why it stuck with me, because it's so low fantasy. Like, if you're someone who's not into fantasy at all, I feel like this would be a good introduction because it's very much a romance. The reason this book resonated with me so much and why I like couldn't stop thinking about it was because it was basically a well done romance. It reminded me so much of like staying up late and reading Wattpad when I was young. It was just addicting in that same way, and like it was so easy to read, so easy to understand, and I was obsessed with the romance and I just loved it so much. This was one of the books I made all my friends read as soon as I finished it. I had the biggest crush on Kai in this book. He's the main male character. Basically, the premise of this book is in this fantasy world, there are people that are born with abilities or powers or whatever, and then there's some people that aren't. Our main character, you quickly learn, is someone who was born without powers. The problem with this is the government executes anyone who doesn't have powers because they believe that they could infect the people with powers. But our female main character, Peyton, has no powers, but she's like the most street smart character. She grew up in like horrible conditions. She had no parents. Her mom left when she was young, and her dad was killed by the government. Ever since then, she's been living on her own with her best friend, basically homeless and having to steal in order to survive. So she's a street thief. She's so smart and so like aware of her surroundings that somehow she was able to convince everyone that she's a psychic, just because of how smart she is. So everyone thinks that she has a power when she doesn't. The whole book starts where the prince, Kai, he's the enforcer for the government, so he like goes off and like has to kill the powerless people. He comes into town, she ends up pickpocketing him. It's this whole thing. She saves his life. Then because she becomes like kind of famous from this event, she gets chosen to compete in these basically like Hunger Games style games where all these different kids with powers compete against each other. People are dying. It's very high stakes, dangerous. You get thrown into this competition to see who wins. And she gets put in these games despite not having any powers. And then Kai, the enforcer, is also competing in these games. It's a romance between them. He doesn't know that she doesn't have powers. But most of this book is honestly the romance between them while they're in these kind of trials and games. And they form an alliance, and I just loved their romance so much. I thought it was so fun. Just such a fun and easy read that I honestly read in 2 days, even though it's like pretty long. I read this entire series this year. There's this book, a novella called Powerful, and then the second book, Reckless, and then the third book comes out, I think, very soon, hopefully. I gave Powerless 5 stars just because of how addictive it was, and I just loved the couple a lot. So that's why this one got 5 stars, and I just think if you're in a slump and you need something quick, fun, and easy, and super romantic, angsty, but like not smutty, this is a great book. I definitely recommend. Okay, the next 2 books that I'm gonna talk about are actually the first 2 books in a series. The series is incomplete, it's still being published, so if you want to jump on and start reading it, I could not recommend it enough. And that is the Rose Hill series. Is that what it's called? Yeah. The Rose Hill series by Elsie Silver. These are the first 2 books, like I said. This is Wild Love and Wild Eyes. I gave this book 5 stars and this book 4.5, I think. I loved these books so much. If you didn't know, these books are a spin-off series of the Chestnut Spring series. This series right here, which this one is all interconnected standalones, cowboy romances set on a ranch in a small town. This is actually the original series too. I've read all of them. So there's this series, then this is a spin-off, but that's the most popular one, and then this is a spin-off of that one. All take place in the same universe, all small town romances, but they can all be read as standalones. Like if you genuinely just wanted to read this one, you could, with having no knowledge of the other ones, and it wouldn't affect your reading experience, I don't think. Obviously reading them in order though makes it so much more fun because it like hints at the next one. So this book, Wild Love, the one that I gave like 4.5 stars, 4.75. This one is childhood friends to lovers. He's a single dad, but he didn't know he had a kid for a really long time. And then she comes into the story when she's like 13, I think. He owns a recording studio in the middle of this small town. It's like ranches and farms, and he owns a recording studio there. It kind of reminds me of like the Long Pond studio. His dream is to like have artists come out to this like, it's kind of like a little retreat recording studio. And his childhood friend, who also happens to be his best friend's little sister, who he's never seen anything romantic with, because I think he's like 8 years older than her, until she comes back to their small town and she ends up working for him or with him, sort of. So it's kind of like working together trope, but she has always had a crush on him like her entire life. She keeps like a diary of when she was younger and like her crush that she's always had on him, and you get to see glimpses of that. And there's just such a good build-up. Elsie Silver just does romance so well in a way that I love, because it's like slow burn enough but keeps you like hanging on. I would say this one is definitely Grumpy Sunshine. He's so serious. He's dealing with a lot. He obviously just realized he's a dad. She just got back into town. She's known as being like crazy and chaotic and like fun, but she's like desperate for a job. And he tries to be like so standoffish, I mean like, I don't like her, whatever. Like he's kind of rude to her. He likes her. And I loved that the whole time he's basically trying to resist her. That was so fun to read. But Wild Eyes, I preferred this one. I loved it even more. This whole series is single dad romances, by the way. This one is about the best friend. So his little sister is the one from this book. then the best friend gets a romance. This is One of Us is Famous trope because the most famous musician, pop star in the world, she comes to the recording studio to record her album. She's like going through so much. She's having a terrible time. She has terrible management. Her family's crazy. Basically just falling out of love with being a musician. And she comes to this recording studio on her own, strikes up a sort of friendship with Wes, who's a single dad, super flirtatious, so fun. She's just like immediately taken back by him because she comes to this small town. He's like a rancher. She's like, what is going on? Like, why am I attracted to this cowboy? Whatever. And I also feel like he is so supportive of her and she's never experienced that before. And their romance was just so good. I was so addicted to this book. I just love how Elsie Silver writes a man. Like, I need him so bad. Like, that's why I love this book. I just have the biggest crush on him. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is also fantasy, and this is Heartless Hunter by Kristen Cicerelli. This book was on my TBR for the longest time, and I kept putting it off thinking like, I don't know if I'm gonna like it. I don't know if I'm gonna like it from reading the description. I loved it. I should have assumed because I feel like everyone that read it loved it. The writing was so magical and fun. The romance, it was kind of a subplot, but not really. I would say it's like half and half, honestly. But this book is about Rune, and similarly to Powerless, just like the opposite way, she's a witch, and witches are like hunted in this fantasy universe. Like, you cannot be a witch. They're immediately like executed, if I remember correctly, and they have been for like years now. And when she was super young, her grandma actually was executed for being a witch. The romance is with the best witch hunter in the entire city, whatever it is. So it's very similar to Powerless in the way that like he hunts the powerless and she's powerless, and then this is he hunts witches and she's a witch. But it was so unique. Like, both of them were so different. In this book though, Rune pretends to be like a socialite. She pretends to be very like shallow, just talking about like clothes and parties and boys, and that's kind of like her ruse to keep what she's actually planning undercover. And she's actually like this very smart, intelligent witch who's planning on like basically causing a revolution. And her two best friends are the only people that know about this. And her one best friend is Alex, and he's actually like in love with her. And for a second there, I thought there was gonna be a love triangle, but Alex's brother, his older brother, is actually who the romance is with, he's the witch hunter. So Alex is kind of in the middle of them because Alex knows that she's a witch. Alex knows what she's planning. Alex also knows that his brother is a witch hunter who is currently on a mission of trying to kill this person they're calling the Crimson Moth. So if you live in the UK, I believe this book is called Crimson Moth, by the way. If you can't find Heartless Hunter, it has a different title. But he's hunting the Crimson Moth, and she's the Crimson Moth, which is basically this witch that's planning the revolution, who's been like saving other witches from being executed and has been killing witch hunters. And so his mission is try to kill her. Like, I even just opened it and it says, wherever Rune Winters went, her carefully crafted reputation came with her. She was an informer, a witch hater, a darling of the New Republic. Nobody suspects that she's a witch planning this whole revolution. It starts going down. Their whole plan is happening in this book. And the ending really threw me because I can't even predict how the next book is gonna go. The next book isn't out yet, but I'm so excited for it to come out and to see how the romance develops and changes from here, because I ship them together so much, but then they're hiding so much from each other. He's literally hunting her and she is pretending to be someone else. So there's so many secrets, and the whole time you're just waiting for them to find out who each other are. And it's so stressful, but so fun. And I remember the entire time I was reading this, my friends were probably so annoyed because I kept just telling them how good my book was. And that's why I knew this book had to be included in this list, because if I'm telling people about it that much, it has to be an incredible book. And I would just say this book is one of the rare ones where the romance and the plot are equally as entertaining and equally as good. Very well written as well. There's so many quotes in here I loved a lot. Actually, another fantasy that I read this year, that's the second book in a series. Everyone's read this. It's Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I love this edition. I have the black sprayed edges. Fourth Wing was my favorite book of last year. I saved this book to read as my first book of 2024. I know, my willpower was so strong. I just wanted to start off the year with like a great book, and I was also intimidated by this because it is so long. And everyone was saying that this book was mainly world building, and I was hearing a lot of negative things about it. So I pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off, avoided all spoilers, and then finally decided to start it as my first book of 2024. And I'm so glad I read it. I don't know why everyone was talking so negatively about it. Like, I genuinely love this book so much. I think obviously I love the first book even more, but I still gave this one 5 stars. I thought it was incredible. I think this series is so genius and fun. It's so entertaining, so easy to read, but also complex and an entire universe on its own with so many creatures, characters, cities, fantasy elements that like I can still comprehend all of it, but I have to like pay attention and really immerse myself in it, which I really enjoy doing. This series will always be so special to me because it's the first fantasy series I've ever read, the first fantasy books I've ever read that introduced me to the genre. I agree with people when they said this book was a lot of world building, but I don't think that hindered my view on it at all. If anything, like I kind of wanted to keep reading when it was ending. I was like, no wait, like I'm not done. Like I just love these characters so much. But I think Fourth Wing is very romance heavy, and this one isn't as romance heavy because their romance is actually already established, or so you think, but you still know how much they're hiding from each other. There's so many secrets, there's so much tension, there's so much at stake all the time. It's always life or death situations. It's so stressful all the time. There's war going on, there's all this stuff. But I adore these books. If you haven't read Fourth Wing, I couldn't recommend it enough. Like the romance is between a first-year student who's at a war college training to be a dragon rider and the instructor at her school who's so hot. He's like my #1 book boyfriend ever. This plot twist in this book, I was not expecting it at all. I don't know what I was expecting the plot twist to be because I knew there was gonna have to be one, but I have no idea where the story is gonna go from here. And I know this series is like signed up to be 5 books, I believe. And I feel like now the first 2 books were just like a prequel, because how could the series is gonna completely change after this book, and I honestly can't wait to see what happens. And I can't wait to see how the romance turns out and what's gonna happen with that. And I just love these books so much. Not even the world building and all the new characters and creatures and stories introduced that I had to take notes on could deter me from giving this book 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I'm gonna talk about, I bet everyone who watches my videos knows what I'm about to say and has been waiting for me to show this book the entire time, because the amount of times I've referenced this book this year shows that it was my favorite book of the year, and that's Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This book, oh, I already want to reread it. I read it twice this year. Isn't that crazy? Twice in 1 year. That I never do that. I rarely reread books, so you know I really loved it if I read it twice. This is just such a fun romance. If you've read any other Abby Jimenez books, it's similar to them. I think I've read all of her books now. This is actually part of an interconnected standalone series, but I feel like this is definitely the most popular one. The books really have no correlation to each other besides some overlap of characters. You don't have to read them. I think it enhanced my experience again by reading them in order, but this book, holy shit. Again, I made everyone I know read it. I could not stop talking about it. I made a TikTok about it that got like millions of views, and I was like, see, that's its impact. This book deserves to be famous. Because looking at it and thinking about her other books, I just thought this was gonna be a really fun romance. She always has like a deep aspect to it, but it's still fun and lighthearted. And that's what this book was, but I adored this book because the character in this book, Emma, again, just like in Funny Story, I felt myself in her so deeply that it just like latched onto me, and I could not forget it because I felt so represented by her. Her mindset, her feelings towards relationships, everything about her, I felt so seen. And I couldn't put this book down because the way that the male main character in this book loves her is something I never even thought possible. Obviously it's fictional, but I hope that there is something like this out in the world because I need it. Basically, Emma and Justin, the 2 main characters, believe that they're like cursed in love, like they're never gonna find love. It's this whole thing, like they don't know each other, but they start talking to each other online about being cursed. So both of them think that everyone they date just finds the love of their life immediately after them. So they're always like the stepping stone to get to the next person, and they're never the final person, they're never the one, whatever. Both of them start talking about this online. They're like texting, calling, and they end up meeting up in person. When I read that synopsis, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this book. So you have to hear me out. If you're hearing that and you're like, that's not for me, it's cringe, whatever. I thought the same. But the way that these characters love each other, no, specifically the way that he loves her. I mean, they both are just so communicative. They talk about everything. It is such a mature relationship. She has so much trauma that she's working through. They both do, but specifically her story I really resonated with. She's basically, if you know the song The Bolter by Taylor Swift, that's her. Every time she's in a good situation, she somehow like finds a way to convince herself out of it and self-sabotage. And he just knew how to love her exactly how she needed. And he learned and adapted, and it was just so perfect in that way. The quotes in this book were insane. Like, I feel like I need to read one of the quotes to you because it's the one I read on TikTok that actually altered my brain chemistry. The reason I adored this book so much is because my love language is acts of service. He does every act of service you can imagine. And if you're thinking like favors, no, it's not that. Listen to this one quote. Like one day she was at work. I just opened up to this page, which is why I bring it up. One day she was at work and he just showed up there and brought her lunch because he wanted to see her. And like those little things that he does throughout this entire book, I think I folded down the page of like every time he did something like that, and there's so many. He also just inherited custody of his siblings, so he's like kind of a single dad right now, figuring out that whole new era of his life. He's so stressed out by it. Doesn't know if he can bring someone else into his life, but he loves Emma so much. It's this whole thing. And he tries so hard with her and is so understanding of everything that she feels and is going through and why she thinks they can't be together. Reading this just makes me want to reread it again. I'm trying to find the one specific quote though that I wanted to read you. I know that this will single-handedly convince you to read this book if you love romance. So this is in the guy's point of view, Justin's point of view. He said, I realized something after being with her, a valuable lesson that I think all the best and most enduring romances have figured out. The love story sold us the wrong thing. The best kind of love doesn't happen on moonlit walks and romantic vacations. It happens in between the folds of everyday life. It's not grand gestures that show how you feel. It's all the little secret things you do to make her life better that you never tell her about. Taking the end piece of the bread at breakfast so she can have the last middle piece for her sandwich when you pack her lunch. Making sure her car always has gas so she never has to stop at the pump. Telling her you're not cold and to take your jacket when you are in fact very, very cold. It's watching TV on a rainy Sunday while you're doing laundry and turning her light off when she's fallen asleep reading. Sharing pizza crust and laughter about something the kids did and taking care of each other when you're sick. It isn't glamorous, it isn't all butterflies and stars in your eyes, it's real. This is the kind of love that forever is made of. Because if it is this good when life is draining and mundane and hard, think of how wonderful it will be when the love songs are playing and the moon is out. Like, that is the definition of an acts of service love language, and he just gets it in a way that I've never heard anyone be able to get it. I mean, Abby Jimenez gets it since she wrote it, but like, I will reference this book forever. Whenever I try to explain to someone what I need, I'm gonna explain that. So please read this. If you need a good, heartfelt romance, like this is it. And it also goes into depth about their characters so much, and I think I love this book for that reason. It's not like a smutty tropey book. It's more of like a character analysis with true love, and I love that so much. Okay, the next book is another fantasy, and this is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. There's 2 books. It's kind of a duology. I've read the novellas too, but I've finished and read this one, and I absolutely loved this one. I thought it was so fun, so entertaining. I gave it 5 stars, couldn't put it down. And I think I just learned I love this same similar trope because all of these books seem to all have it. It's the same fantasy trials and games that remind me of the Hunger Games. This book has that as well. And this book was unique because it is about vampires, which I never read until this year. The only thing I knew about was Twilight. But the main character, Araya, is not a vampire, but she was adopted by the Vampire King. So she was raised in the vampire society with the vampires. So she's always been exposed to it. And she decides that she becomes of age, I think, and she's gonna enter herself into this yearly tournament where all these vampires can compete. It low-key feel like it's like competition to the death. Actually, I don't think so, but they like train for it. It's like this whole thing. But she strikes up an alliance with Rain, the male main character, who I was again obsessed with. He's a vampire. He has a reputation of being like super dangerous, ruthless, like a killer. He's also part of like the enemy vampire group that her dad was the king of one side and he's part of the other side. So it's like forbidden in that way, but she can't help but feel drawn to him, of course. So the 2 of them kind of strike up an alliance prior to going into this tournament. They come to an agreement, they train together, they're kind of like living together, if I remember correctly. And I think the tournament starts when they're already like falling in love, or maybe there's different trials and they like go back home in between. I don't really remember. I read this at the beginning of the year, and I definitely need to do a reread before I go back into the second book. Maybe I'll listen to the audiobook of this to refresh my memory because I really, really liked it, but I feel like I barely remember it because of how quickly I read it. Does anyone else like read a book so fast that you like it like goes in one ear out the other? That's kind of how I feel about this because it was so detailed and intricate and I loved it so much, but I still like don't remember the details and I need to reread it. This book has a plot twist in it, and then the next book follows from that plot twist kind of, and I did not love where the story went, and I know I need to give it another chance so that I can experience the romance and like fall back in love with it, but it just wasn't doing it for me in the second one. And I know there's definitely more that I need to learn in order to like forgive the characters and like get back into the story. So I just need to do it. I love this book so much and I don't want to just like abandon the series. Okay, right after that, I randomly have another vampire romance, which is like so random for me, but this is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was a werewolf vampire romance. No, it's not Twilight. I flew through this book. This is probably my favorite Ali Hazelwood book. I don't absolutely love her regular romances, but something about this like paranormal fantasy-esque romance I loved. I've never read like a werewolf book either, And this made me want to get into the genre, I'm gonna be honest, because this has been hiding out there. There's a whole universe of these that I haven't gotten into, and I think I need to. So similarly to the last vampire romance, this one is also about the daughter of a vampire king. I think he was a king, maybe a president of some sort, the leader. In this fictional world, there's like cities for humans, cities for vampires, cities for werewolves. Okay, like they all know each other exist, but they all just coexist in their own spaces. They don't leave. But I'm pretty sure she was living a very human life with her human best friend and like didn't really care about being a vampire, was working a regular job, living as a human. But then her dad tells her that in order to strike up an alliance with the werewolves, she has to marry one of them, and he's marrying her off. And she's obviously like, hell no, like 1, they're gonna kill me, 2, I just wanna be a human, and 3, I don't even like you. She doesn't even like her dad. She said, why would I help you? But this was like the only way for them to keep their alliance. Like I think like a war was starting or something was about to go down, and she needed to do this in order to protect basically everyone. So she has to go and live with the werewolves, and she gets there, and luckily the guy that she's being forced to marry is fine. Okay, look at the cover. He has a shaved head and he's tall and huge, okay? I wouldn't complain either. So she moves into his house. They hate each other at first. I want to reread this book. When I talk about it, I'm like, damn, like I need to reread this. They hate each other at first. They're enemies, they're opposites, whatever. He doesn't understand her, she doesn't understand him. And he is the alpha of like this pack. So he's like their leader as well. There's a little bit of secrets going on because she has her own motives, but they fall in love. And it's so good, and he cares about her so much and is so like in tune with everything about her. There's like having to save her trope and her having to help him. It's so good. I love an opposites attract, and I love this trope. Allie Hazelwood, she should do more in this genre because I really loved it. Okay, I have 2 more books to talk about. I think there actually was 11 books. I think I counted wrong, but 2 of them were part of a series, so we can say it was 10. But the next one is Play Long by Liz Tom Ford. This was the 4th book in the Windy City series, and this series is everything. It's probably one of my favorite interconnected standalone series of all time, up there with Chestnut Springs. I love these books. You guys know The Right Move was my favorite book of last year, which is the 2nd book in the series. This one's probably my 2nd favorite in the series. I loved it so much. I've loved like every book in that series, honestly. They're all above 4 stars. I would say the last 3 are literally 4.5 to 5 stars. This is boy obsessed trope. He's been obsessed with her throughout the entire series. We've watched it. He's on the baseball team. These are all sports romances. She is the athletic trainer for the team, or the director. I think she's a trainer. She like is the one that takes care of them when they get hurt, whatever. He's had a crush on her for the longest time. You've watched it throughout all the books. This book starts with them basically waking up in Las Vegas married, okay? And she's like, what the hell did I do? I don't even like this guy. She does, but she's in denial because she really cares about her position on the team, and she's constantly undermined for being the only woman in a male-dominated sport, and she doesn't want to seem like she's sleeping her way to the top. She knows what people are going to say if they find out what happened, so she accidentally marries him in Vegas. And he's over the moon because he's like in love with her already. Very boy obsessed, which normally I'm not into as much, but the way that Liz Tom Ford did it in this book, I loved. They end up deciding to tell everyone that this was a planned thing, that they've been in love all along, this was an elopement and whatever, because she doesn't want to lose her job. So she was recently out of a relationship, and she used to be engaged, and Isaiah has basically been waiting for her to become single the entire time he's known her. And I just love this book. I love how protective he was of her. I love how like he was supposed to be like the funny, goofy, never serious, never feels anything, is just like the comedic relief character, but he was so much deeper than that, and I really loved finally getting his perspective. And I love how these tie in with the other books. I love seeing them all be friends. I love them all having family dinners together and seeing all the old couples, and I love an interconnected standalone series, and I love this one especially, and I definitely recommend it. If you love sports romance, you'll love these. Okay, the last book that I'm going to be talking about in today's video is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This book has been recommended to me for the longest time, and I put it on my TBR because the author of Powerless said that this was one of the books that inspired her to write her book, and I can totally see how this book influenced that one. This book was incredibly written. If you want a well-written fantasy, a well-written romantasy, I really recommend this. I feel like everyone has already read this, but I loved it and I also recommend it. The girl in it is a street thief, just like Powerless. She totally got that idea from this, I feel like. She was a street thief growing up, but now she's part of like the military, I think. I don't know how like to explain the equivalent, but she basically part of the Raton, which is like their military. She directly protects the queen of the city that she lives in, and she's sent on a mission where she's really trying to prove herself. She finally gets like her own mission, her and her 2 best friends, to go to this other city, basically investigate undercover what everyone thinks is like not following the rules. So they're like undercover in this other city, and she ends up falling in love with the recently appointed king. It is so good. I went in completely blind. I had no idea what this was about, but I just loved it. I feel like Powerless was just a very romancy version of this, whereas this was more well-written plot. And I loved reading this one second because it felt like a even more developed version of it, and an even like more well-written, less romancy and like less usually the like the tropey fun things that I like. Much more mature. So good. I read both of this, Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves, this year, and I just loved this one. I loved their love for each other. I loved how I could envision all of it so well in my head. Loved this book. I gave it 5 stars as well. Those are all my favorite books of the year. They're like sitting right next to me, if you can see them stacked up right here. I'm so glad I filmed this video. I love talking about books. I've missed talking about books, and I just love books. Those were my favorite ones of the year. I hope you enjoyed seeing it. I hope that you'll take my recommendations and hopefully enjoy them as well. If you're making your TBR for the new year, add these books if this is your taste. And please comment your favorite book of the year or your favorites if you want to make a whole list, because I'm also making my 2025 TBR and would love your recommendations. But yeah, those are my favorite books of the year. I hope you enjoyed seeing. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to follow me on my other social medias, they're all linked down below as always, as well as my Goodreads. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video tomorrow.